It hit me right as I was locking up the back gate. Friday, 6:12 p.m., sky bleeding into a dusty orange, boots soaked from that busted pipe nobody bothered to fix until I called it out 3 times on the vendor portal. I turned. One last look at the yard, humming with generators and heat coils and enough buried liability to bankrupt a city if the wrong form didn't get filed. That's when I saw Jack Farrow leaning on his rented Mustang, sunglasses on like he thought Texas would somehow bend to his Boston swagger. He was laughing on the phone, real relaxed, real smug. Then I heard it, clear as day. She's just paperwork, dead weight, already handled. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I walked to my truck like I hadn't just been gutted in 4 words. Drove home, poured a glass of unsweet tea, and stared at my kitchen calendar like it had answers. 11 years. 2 hurricanes, 1 plant fire, 8 zero-incident audits. I kept us open when other facilities buckled. But I was just paperwork now. I was a checklist in boots. Disposable. Legacy support. Before I go any further, if you're hearing this and you've ever kept something running in the background while louder people took the credit, do me one favor. Tap that subscribe button and like the video. 97% of folks never do, and it helps more than you know. Seriously, it keeps stories like mine from disappearing, like they tried to do with me. Anyway, that night, I pulled out my personal file, the one nobody knew existed. Copies of every contract I'd ever signed, in triplicate. Utility contact logs, FEMA liaison forms, vendor onboarding protocols, cross-signed continuity clauses, time-stamped. My signature, dry, sharp, permanent, on every single agreement that kept the plant humming. I wasn't paranoid, I was prepared. Because I knew what people like Jack Farrow never bothered to learn. Systems don't run on speeches. They run on the people who know where the breakers are buried. I didn't say anything to my husband when he asked how the day went. Just said I was tired. He rubbed my shoulders while we watched the ceiling fan spin, and I stared at the light bulb I replaced during a blackout 3 years ago, when no one from exec even showed up. I was the one handing out flashlights and rerouting power. No spotlight, no photo ops, just grit. Monday morning, I wasn't on the invite list for the all hands. That was the first clue. Second was the look on Sarah's face. HR girl, sweet, too green to know how to mask pity. She handed me a manila envelope and whispered, "I'm so sorry." I asked if I could at least brief the ops team. She said no. Jack said clean breaks only. So I walked. No speech, no memo, just me and a box of desk stuff nobody even glanced at. My badge was already deactivated. Couldn't even unlock the copier room to grab the plant schematics I drew up by hand in 17. I passed my own face on the emergency wall. Continuity Officer Nora Ellis, XT, Shep 1429. My name would be there until someone thought to update it, and they wouldn't. Not in time. Outside, it was hot as sin. I got in my truck, turned the ignition, and didn't move. Just sat with the AC blasting and my heart doing that quiet panic thing, like it knew something my brain hadn't caught up to yet. This wasn't just a layoff. This was a blindfolding. Jack didn't know what I did. He didn't ask. He saw a quiet woman in her 40s with binders and thought, obsolete. But those binders? They weren't decoration. They were the reason the EPA never shut us down. They were the reason our water permit hadn't expired since 2012. That night, I opened my laptop. Logged into the vendor redundancy system, one they still hadn't removed me from because, surprise, nobody knew it existed. I ran a quiet audit. 6 red flags. Vendor authorizations lapsed. Utility authentication node, still tied to me. Emergency override credentials, mine. I didn't sabotage anything. I just let things sit. I closed the laptop and went to bed. 3 days later, the lights would go out. And Jack Farrow would finally learn what paperwork looks like when it stops holding everything together. Friday felt like a setup. You could taste the smugness in the air. Someone had brought donuts, which never happens unless a storm's coming or someone's about to get axed. I was finishing up a cross-check on our emergency diesel contracts when the ping hit. Company-wide email. Subject line, agility reset. I clicked. Short, cold, no greeting, no sign-off, just corporate butchery typed from a goddamn iPhone. Effective immediately, we are redesigning for agility, essential personnel only, details Monday. No mention of who was essential. No thank you. Just that. I stared at the screen so long the text started to blur. I scrolled. Twice. 3 times. My name didn't appear. Not once. I wasn't essential. I wasn't even addressed. After 11 years of being the glue between power lines and legal signatures, I was officially classified as dead weight in 12 words or less. I sat back, the silence thick around me, then slowly closed the laptop. My hand hovered over the sticky note I kept on the corner of the monitor. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. My mentor wrote that to me once in red ink. She died of cancer 2 years ago. I left it there anyway. That weekend, I packed my office alone. Nobody offered to help. Nobody said goodbye. They were scared. Not of me, of being next. Jack had rolled through like a storm chaser with a god complex, tossing streamlining around like a grenade, and every exec with a tie was too busy shielding their own ass to notice the foundation cracking under them. I boxed my things slowly, binder after binder, each labeled, dated, cross-referenced to continuity protocol signed by state and federal regulators. Each one useless now, apparently, because I was legacy. Come Monday, I parked in Visitor. My badge had been deactivated, so I walked in through the front, like I didn't know the back gates better than the architect who designed them. Someone had moved the lobby plants. It looked sterile now, cold, like they were trying to scrub out memory. All hands started at 9 sharp. Jack stood up front, sleeves rolled like he thought he was on a TED stage, and opened with a joke about clogged pipes and legacy systems. I didn't laugh, neither did anyone else. He clicked through a slide deck full of buzzwords: agile, nimble, lean, vertical integration, like he was pitching to a boardroom that wasn't in the room. Then he paused, looked toward the seat I used to fill, and said it. Some functions were legacy support, were streamlining. Not even a name, just a category, a discarded label. I looked around. Nobody blinked, nobody turned their head. Eyes stayed forward, jaws tight. The room sat in stiff silence while the guy who just fired 6 people called it progress. I saw one of the guys from facilities shift in his chair like he might puke. I kept walking, past the break room, past the printer I personally had reconnected during the last outage, past the vending machine I once restocked with my own damn change during lockdown, carrying a single box with a cracked mug, 1 photograph, and the pen I used to sign our FEMA response protocol, and not a single person met my eyes. That's the thing about corporate grief. It's silent. Nobody gets a eulogy, you just vanish and the lights stay on until they don't. Until someone goes to flip a breaker and finds out the name tied to that contract. It isn't there anymore. Because she took her name with her, and no one thought to learn how the system actually worked before they deleted the only person who ever read the manual. I didn't leave angry. I left prepared. Because I knew what was coming next. Cracks always show up in silence. You just have to listen long enough. Jack strutted around calling it a clean pivot, like he'd just masterminded some surgical corporate evolution instead of gutting the only person who actually knew where the operational skeletons were buried. He stood in Monday's follow-up huddle with that damn Bluetooth still lodged in his ear like it was fused to his skull, sipping some overpriced Boston-imported coffee and talking about clearing legacy redundancies. Meanwhile, the building was already beginning to hum wrong. The first crack came that night, 11:42 p.m. I was up reading when I got a message from Miguel, one of the night ops techs. He'd tried to confirm our backup power utility account after a weird dip in voltage. The system bounced him. Invalid authority credential, it said. The contact on the account, me, had been scrubbed. Jack hadn't reassigned it. He hadn't even thought to. By sunrise, the HVAC maintenance crew rolled up, right on schedule, contractually obligated monthly inspection. Except security wouldn't let them in. Why? The work order still had my name on it. Nobody had updated the access list. No one had replaced the authorization token I used to generate. The techs stood in the lobby for 45 minutes until they left. Systems started to drift. By Tuesday morning, I was sitting on my porch with coffee and an inbox full of non-forwarded vendor auto-replies. My credentials had gone cold, but the systems hadn't accepted new ones. A couple of them flagged the change as potential sabotage, which meant the fail-safes kicked in. Jack thought you could just replace a person by erasing their name from a chart. Problem is, when your name is tied into 6 different multi-platform continuity trees, that deletion doesn't replace anything. It just breaks everything. Around noon, a facilities team member, Tommy, sweet kid, green as spring, pinged me from his personal phone. Ms. Ellis, were you the contact for VentCore? They won't confirm the next shipment without primary authentication. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Legally, I was out. But I stared at his message and felt that quiet dread settle in my bones, like watching someone drive off a cliff in slow motion while asking where the brake pedal is. Back at the plant, the ops team flagged my name missing from a vendor compliance portal that tracked critical emergency overrides. They raised the red flag. Jack waved it off. His actual response? I kid you not. Flip the breaker, or call someone who can. Thing is, nobody could. The system didn't take orders from just anyone. It wasn't built that way. We had a tiered trust protocol, something I'd helped draft post-Harvey, where specific individuals were whitelisted to prevent command spoofing. That included everything from HVAC overrides to water treatment resets. You could flip all the breakers you wanted, but if your credentials weren't logged at root level, the system would ignore you, at best. At worst, lock you out completely and escalate to automatic system defense. Yeah, I'd built it that tight, because I remembered what it was like in 17 when we lost 18 hours of cooling because some jackass ran a wrong script trying to help. Jack didn't understand systems like that. He understood org charts, not architecture, not fallback trees, not the little things you only learn after staying up for 38 hours straight in a boiler room while stormwater floods the West Wing and nobody from corporate picks up. By Wednesday morning, they'd called 3 separate vendors to figure out why things weren't syncing. None of them had access. All of them pointed back to the same name, mine. And still, nobody said it out loud. Nobody wanted to admit they'd amputated a limb thinking it was dead weight, only to discover it was the spine. Jack just kept clicking, pivoting, posture correcting himself into a corner. They'd cut me loose, but I hadn't left the system. I just wasn't there to save them anymore. Tuesday morning started like any other, too quiet, the kind of quiet that only exists right before something breaks. I know that quiet. I've lived inside it for a decade. I was at home, folding laundry, when my phone buzzed for the first time at 8:39 a.m., unknown number. I didn't answer. 3 minutes later, the house lights flickered. Not mine, the plant's. I felt it in my chest before I ever heard a word. At 8:42 a.m., the lights went out across the facility. Not a brownout, not a test cycle, full stop. Emergency generators kicked in like they were supposed to, but only partially, because partial authorization is still authorization failure. By 9:15, HVAC systems began to fail one zone at a time. You don't notice it right away unless you know what to look for. Pressure, imbalance, alarms cascading instead of resolving, fans spinning but not syncing. Heat started pooling in the production wings. Sensitive materials don't like that. Neither do people. By 11 Tao, the water system went offline. That's when the panic set in. You can run without lights for a while. You can even limp along without full cooling if you're desperate and reckless. But water? Water is the line. Cooling towers, sanitation, fire suppression, once that's gone, you're not a factory anymore. You're a liability. Production was halted immediately. $12 million in temperature-sensitive materials were already compromised, ticking away by the minute. Every degree shift was money bleeding out onto the floor. Supervisors were shouting into radios. Someone pulled the fire doors manually, which you're never supposed to do unless you want a compliance nightmare. Alarms stacked. Screens flashed warnings nobody in that room had ever bothered to learn how to interpret. Jack stormed the floor like volume could fix physics. I heard later he was red-faced, veins out, screaming at techs half his age to override the system and just reboot the damn thing. He demanded to know why nobody had called the utility yet. Someone did. Someone finally did. That call lasted less than 4 minutes, because the utility didn't recognize the voice on the line. They asked for the authorized continuity contact, the name on file, the one tied to the federal continuity rider and the emergency service addendum Jack never read because it was just paperwork. My phone rang again at 9:07, then again at 9:09, then a number from legal at 9:14. I watched it buzz on the counter like a trapped insect. I didn't answer. Not because I was being cruel, because I knew exactly what was happening on the other end, and I knew I didn't work there anymore. By 9:30, legal had pulled Jack into a side room. No shouting leaked out. That's how you know it's bad. Lawyers don't yell when things are fixable. They get very quiet when they aren't. Someone had finally opened the contracts. All of them. The ones I signed. The ones that required a named authority for any override, any reauthorization, any emergency exception. The ones written after Hurricane Harvey when the state made it very clear they didn't want improvisation anymore. They wanted accountability. One name. One chain of trust. Mine. By the time that realization hit the room, it was already spreading. Not fast. Slow. Like smoke under a door. There's no authorized contact left. No workaround, no temporary proxy, no just update it. Because you can't update authority during an active failure without triggering a 3-week regulatory review. That's not a suggestion. That's federal law. The same law I'd quietly enforced for years while everyone else complained about red tape. Jack had removed me without review, without transition, without replacement. And now the system was doing exactly what it was designed to do when that happened. Nothing. I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, listening to the distant hum of my refrigerator and thinking about the irony of it all. The plant was dark, silent, burning money by the second, and the loudest man in the building had finally collided with the quietest truth in business. You can fire people. You can erase titles. But you cannot delete a name that's holding the infrastructure together and expect the lights to stay on. At 11:46 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was the CEO. They called it an escalation review, like addressing the gallows in velvet makes the noose any softer. Jack sat in that glass-walled conference room, sleeves rolled, jaw set, still clinging to the illusion that charisma could outmaneuver paperwork. He was surrounded by the people who'd once nodded through his buzzwords, but now they were all looking down at the same manila folder like it was a live wire. One of the utility attorneys laid it out flat on the table. Page after page, not just contracts, but addenda, regulatory riders, wet-signed originals, every single one with my initials in the lower right corner. Nora Ellis, she said, calm, even. Per federal continuity regs, she is the only listed authority on all essential systems tied to utility provisioning and infrastructure dependencies. Jack didn't get it. Not at first. He thought it was a paperwork issue. A clerical bottleneck. Okay, so just update it, he said. We'll reassign, issue a new contact record. The attorney's smile didn't even twitch. You can't do that mid-event. What event? She slid a form across the table. Infrastructure failure during an active operations window, that's an event. He looked to legal. They blinked, swallowed. One of them, a newer guy I didn't recognize, finally found the courage to say what everyone else in that room already knew but hadn't dared put into words. Even if we filed the reassignment now, it's a 3-week compliance lockout. Nothing changes until the freeze clears. 3 weeks. That's how long the plant would sit dead in the water, literally, unless someone figured out a way to summon the ghost of a woman they erased on a Friday with a one-line email. Back in my kitchen, I was drinking lukewarm coffee from the mug I'd once kept next to the operations server rack. Continuity is quiet, it said. I'd printed it myself during a supply chain audit. It was supposed to be funny. The thing nobody grasped about those contracts? They weren't boilerplate. They were living systems. I'd built them after years of near misses, each line forged in sweat, hard lessons, and close calls. After that pipe collapse in 2016, I rewrote the disaster response to require dual authenticated overrides. After the fire in 18, I added the clause about named personnel per department. And after Harvey, when we had to beg the state not to decertify us, I embedded clause 4.2a. Authority credentials may not be reassigned during a failure state conditions without continuity confirmation from the current signee, which meant that even if they tried to cut me back in, they couldn't. Not until I signed something. Not until I acknowledged the request. At 2:04 p.m., Jack finally cracked. Can we call her? He asked. Not to the room, not to the CEO, just out loud. The way a man talks when he realizes the train has already left the station, and he's holding a map written in crayon. One of the assistants pulled up my old contact sheet. My number was still in the system. Of course it was, because no one had deleted it. They'd just forgotten it mattered. I let the first 2 calls go to voicemail, not to be cruel, to make a point. Because for years, I'd been the name buried in the appendix, the one they skipped over in the meeting minutes, the one they called when the floodwaters rose, but never invited to strategy sessions. I was never on stage, never in the newsletter. But now they couldn't flip a switch without me. A name at the bottom of the page had more power than every title Jack Farrow ever put on a slide. By 4 hours, the CEO himself had left 2 voicemails. Polite. Careful. The 3rd call came just before 5 I answered. And I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just asked one question. "Have you read the contracts?" There was a pause on the other end. Then he said very quietly, "We have." I said, "Good. Then you know what I need before I step 1 foot back on that property." Because the truth was no longer buried in a binder. It was printed, signed, and stapled to every system they couldn't restart without me. And no amount of ego was going to overwrite that. Wednesday morning, 7:52 a.m., my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen since the last time we renewed our emergency contracts. Daniel Reed, the CEO. Not a call from legal, not a scramble from operations. Him. Direct. The last time we spoke was during a site tour for a state senator. He shook my hand, asked a question about carbon offsets, then forgot I existed as soon as Jack started talking about transformative ecosystems. Now, though, his voice sounded like gravel dragged through exhaustion. "Nora," he said, "just my name. Like that alone might fix it." I waited. He cleared his throat, said the board was concerned, said the plant was sitting on $12 million in spoiled inventory, said they were preparing disclosures, said he needed stabilization expertise, and that no one had been able to reach functional vendors since Monday. I said nothing. He tried again. "We're not asking you to undo what's happened, just to help us move forward." I sipped my coffee, let the pause stretch, then answered like I'd rehearsed it in my sleep, because I had. "If I return," I said, "it will be under a new title. VP Operational Continuity, not interim. Permanent." He didn't object, didn't even flinch, which told me they were further gone than they'd let on. "I also want indemnity," I continued. "In writing, signed and notarized, full release of liability for the shutdown, and..." I let that hang in the air for a second. Jack's signature confirming he removed me without review or consultation. I want it scanned, stamped, and on file with legal. Silence. Then a slow inhale like he was swallowing glass. "Nora, would you be willing to help today?" I didn't raise my voice, didn't soften it either. "When I see the letter." I hung up. Didn't wait for a response, didn't check to see if he texted. Just set the phone down and opened the laptop I hadn't touched in 36 hours. The vendor dashboards were already blinking like they'd missed me. 3 contracts had gone into suspension. 2 more were overdue for renewal. Contracts I'd pinged them about 6 weeks ago and was told not to worry. 1 portal had timed out completely, requiring manual reauthentication through a system I designed back when the original ops lead nearly got us fined for forgetting to file our quarterly verification with the EPA. I'd built that back up myself, on a weekend, because no one else understood how our utility dependencies tied into the state's service chain. Jack called it over-engineering. I called it sleeping through the night. At 9:31 a.m., I received a secure email from legal. Attached was a PDF titled Emergency Retainer and Title Reassignment, Nora Ellis. It was 7 pages long. On page 2, VP Operational Continuity. On page 4, a clause exempting me from any operational blame or retroactive disciplinary review for the incident. And on the last page, under the indemnity signature block, was Jack Farrow's name, scrawled in that same arrogant slant I'd watched him use to sign off on his first reorg memo. Except this time, it looked rushed, hesitant, like he'd finally been handed the thing he couldn't bluff his way around: accountability. I opened a fresh document, drafted a 3-sentence reactivation plan, uploaded it through a secure portal I never deleted access to, because I never assumed anyone was smart enough to replace it, and they weren't. By noon, power was stable. By 2 hours, water was online. By 4 hours, HVAC was back in sync and vendor traffic returned to green. No press release, no welcome back email, just a quiet shift. The sound of a building exhaling because I didn't want my old job back. I wanted the power that came with finally being seen as what I'd always been, essential, documented, and irreplaceable. Thursday morning, I walked through the main entrance, not because I had to, but because I wanted every person in that building to see what restoration looks like. My old badge had been deactivated, so security handed me a new one, silver trim, embedded chip. It felt heavier than the last, not metaphorically, literally. New access layer, new title encoded. VP, Continuity and Infrastructure Integrity. I slid it through the turnstile and heard that satisfying click. Clean. Authoritative. The silence that followed my entrance was different than before. Not avoidance, not fear. Something closer to awe, maybe, or confusion. The kind that creeps in when the person you were told didn't matter walks back in, holding every single thread you didn't realize had unraveled. I didn't wave. I didn't smile. Just nodded to the receptionist and walked to the elevator. Inside, someone from finance got in behind me. She didn't say anything at first, just held her folder close to her chest, eyes on the floor. Then, right as the doors started to close, she whispered, "I'm really glad you're back." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because I wasn't back. I'd never really left. They just stopped looking in the right direction. By noon, systems were humming. Vendor confirmations were green across the board. 2 teams I'd trained years ago had already reactivated continuity protocols I embedded during one of the worst freeze events we'd ever faced. Operations resumed. Quiet, clean, efficient. Jack was gone by 2:45. No announcement, no press. Just a quiet HR escort and a digital access revocation logged at 2:46 p.m. I was copied on it. Out of protocol, not sentiment. His name disappeared from every access dashboard like it had never been there to begin with. And just like that, the man who claimed I was just paperwork was filed away himself. At 3:10 p.m., an internal memo hit inboxes. Subject: Leadership update. It was brief, clinical. Nora Ellis has been appointed Vice President, Continuity and Infrastructure Integrity, effective immediately. Please direct all future operational continuity matters to her office. No speech, no flowers, no all hands. But when I reached the hallway near the executive suite, I paused. Because on the frosted glass door that used to belong to an exec whose name nobody remembered, a new nameplate had been installed. Etched in brushed steel. Nora Ellis, Vice President, Continuity and Infrastructure, Integrity, and just below it, a single word in bold, essential. I didn't cry. I didn't linger. I opened the door, walked in, and sat down at the desk. The space was sparse, by choice. 1 monitor, a single shelf of black binders labeled with dates and initials. My initials. A framed document sat off to the side. Jack's signed indemnity. I didn't put it there as a trophy. I put it there as a reminder. Because power doesn't always look like a corner office. Sometimes it looks like being the only person who knew how to keep the lights on. I sent 2 emails that afternoon. One to legal, requesting clause updates to prevent unreviewed removals of essential personnel ever again. And one to the systems team with the subject line, Rebuild Proposal, Tiered Continuity Framework. No threats, no demands, just structure, stability. Because I wasn't there to prove anything anymore. I was there to make sure no one else ever had to fix what someone else broke in the dark. By 5 p.m., the plant was fully operational. By 6 p.m., the vendor rep who refused to speak to Jack sent a short message. Glad she's back. They meant me. Not because I was nice, not because I played the game, but because when the power failed, the water shut off and the numbers started bleeding red. I was the only one who knew how to stop the bleeding, and this time, everyone damn well knew it. I didn't go back to fix what was broken. I went back to build what should have existed all along, without shortcuts, without ego, and without the fragile illusions that one person could hold a system together without anyone noticing until she was gone. This time, there would be no mystery. No silence. No single point of failure. I built redundancies so dense a Category 5 hurricane could rip through our grid and we'd still keep humming. First order of business. The contract tree. What used to be locked in binders, physical, indexed, color-coded by quarter, I turned into a living digital archive. Encrypted, time-stamped, multi-access layered, 3 levels of authentication, 2 alternates per critical contract. You couldn't sneeze near a utility agreement now without tripping a review flag. I didn't just bring us back online, I rebuilt the nerve center with fault tolerance in its DNA. Second, personnel structure. I built what I called the skeleton crew, cross-functional, cross-trained. 2 people from every department, facilities, legal, procurement, IT trained in emergency continuity, vendor negotiation, and compliance authorization. Every single one could walk into a shutdown scenario and stabilize it within the hour. That wasn't paranoia. That was learning. Because systems don't break from chaos. They break from silence, from the assumption that someone else is handling it. Third, the handbook. 74 pages titled in all caps, Continuity, Shark Survival. First sentence, printed bold. Essential is not subjective. It's documented. Every line after that was a translation of the systems I'd built over the years into language anyone could follow. I didn't gatekeep. I didn't protect my job by making it harder for others to understand. That's what got us into this mess in the first place. Power hoarded by people who didn't even understand how to use it. I turned my job into an operating system. And it worked. Jack's former executive assistant, Rachel, ended up transferring into my department after everything fell apart. She was sharp. Embarrassed maybe by how much she hadn't seen. But she learned fast. She asked questions. Took notes. She wasn't trying to climb anymore. She was trying to contribute. That mattered more than a title ever did. One evening, a few weeks into the rebuild, she stopped by my office. Quiet moment. Just the 2 of us. She stood at the door holding a folder and asked something I hadn't expected. Why didn't you fight harder when he fired you? I looked up from my screen, met her eyes, and gave the same answer I'd told myself in the mirror that day with the cardboard box in my arms. Because I already had the signatures. She didn't say anything at first, just nodded, walked out. But I saw it in her face, the moment the truth settled. See, Jack thought I lost because I left quietly, but I wasn't walking away from a defeat. I was walking toward a guaranteed return. Everything I'd ever signed, filed, notarized, every quiet document he'd dismissed was waiting like loaded chess pieces behind a curtain. I didn't yell because I didn't need to. The paper was louder than I'd ever be. And now? Now I had more than a title. I had a system that couldn't be erased with an email, a network that didn't rely on a single person's memory, a backup for every function, including me. We implemented drills, quarterly, no warnings, no prep. I'd kill power to Sector C and watch the team reroute in under 10 minutes. Water shutdown in production? Resolved in 7. Vendor override blocked by default credentials? Resolved by backup credential holder with full logging. Not one person. A system. That's the legacy I wanted. Not a framed quote on the wall. Not my name in some speech. Just continuity. Documented. Enduring. Because this time, there's a backup. And if someone like Jack ever walks through our doors again, swinging his MBA and buzzwords like a sword, he'll find a structure so deeply rooted he couldn't dig it out with both hands and a blowtorch. Because I'm not the system anymore. I just built it. A month later, they brought in folding chairs for the board review, some symbolic gesture to show they were leaning into transparency, as if uncomfortable furniture could offset executive negligence. I wore a charcoal blazer, nothing flashy, no makeup, no mask, just quiet authority and a folder so tightly tabbed it could have served as a spine replacement for the entire building. On the table, a 38-page walkthrough of the new disaster matrix with section headers like vendor cascade triggers and interruption recovery by authority class. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to endure. One of the board directors, a man I'd only seen in filtered portraits and shareholder reports, tapped the edge of the printout with a manicured finger and asked the question that hung in the room like a last breath. Who built this? The CEO, Daniel, didn't hesitate. No throat clear, no deflection. He just turned his head toward me and said, Nora, she's behind all of it. Silence followed, not out of disrespect, out of weight. Because in that moment, everyone in that room understood that what they were holding wasn't a plan. It was a reckoning. On the big screen at the end of the table, a utility VP dialed in via Zoom, one of the same men who'd refused to acknowledge Jack's request just 3 weeks earlier. He squinted at the report, tilted his head. then gave a slow nod and said, "Finally, someone who gets it. Not good work, not well done, just finally. Because in the world of infrastructure, you don't get applause. You get stability, and that stability had a name. Mine. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just turned to the next page and began walking them through a simulation. Partial grid loss, flood event, vendor override rejection. In each scenario, the response was automatic, documented, cross-signed, triple redundant. And at the center of it all was the new continuity tree, a lattice of responsibility that could survive ego, silence, and turnover. After the meeting, Daniel followed me back to my office. He didn't speak for a minute, just stood at the threshold, staring at the framed line above my bookshelf. It wasn't a quote from a famous author or executive. It was mine. I'd scribbled it on a sticky note 7 years earlier and kept it taped to the inside of my old binder until I had it printed properly. It read, "Sign nothing you wouldn't bet your company on." He nodded once and walked away. I stood alone in the quiet hum of systems coming online, in the faint tapping of restored vendor networks, in the soft whoosh of functioning HVAC. This was never about revenge. It was about restoration, proof, documentation. Because essential isn't a feeling. It's not a performance review. It's not a speech or a bouquet or a seat at the all-hands table. It's a trail of signatures. It's the name that appears on every page when the stakes are high and the lights go out. And mine were airtight. Still are.